Have you ever wondered what drove black legends, those immortal voices who etched themselves into the memories of a generation, into marriages with penniless partners? Was it pure love, or merely the initial hurdle to crushing tragedies? They once conquered the peaks of fame, dominating your radio for decades. But behind the dazzling lights lay a bitter truth. Wretched nights, mercilessly drained bank accounts, and self-respect slowly rotting away. These are 19 bitter marriages they wish to keep hidden forever. Do you have the courage to hear it to the very end? And if you think all tragedies are just rumors, let's begin with a ballad queen who married a man with nothing, only to pay the ultimate price. 19. Phyllis Hyman, the ballad queen, who married a man who counted her every penny. In a luxurious New York apartment, where the voice of black soul queen Phyllis Hyman once resonated across American airwaves, a nameless man quietly sat counting every penny she painstakingly earned. Few would have guessed that those very hands contributed to pushing her to the brink of despair. Phyllis Hyman was one of those rare contralto voices, famous for her hit, "You Know How to Love Me." Audiences revered her as the lonely ballad queen, someone who could transform sorrow into music. When the spotlight first shone on Phyllis's life, she met Larry Alexander, a struggling sound engineer who grew up in a desolate Brooklyn neighborhood. His father passed away early, and his mother worked as a waitress. Larry grew up in poverty to the extent that for 3 years he wore only one old brown suit, earning him the nickname Larry Suit from his colleagues. They began their relationship in 1977. At that time, Phyllis was slowly becoming a star, earning around $300,000 annually from touring and recording, while Larry made less than $16,000. The enormous disparity didn't prevent the wedding from taking place, even though the groom's family couldn't afford a gift and only sent a $20 envelope. At the wedding reception, all eyes were on the radiant bride, while Larry huddled in a corner as if he didn't belong in that glamorous world. But that very inferiority complex gradually transformed into an obsession that enveloped the relationship. By 1985, as Phyllis was diligently recording her album Living All Alone, Larry began to control all her expenses, from utility bills to wardrobe costs. In the eyes of her colleagues, he was nothing short of his wife's check-signing king. Within just 1 year, Phyllis had to spend over $140,000 to support both of them, while Larry contributed almost nothing. The climax of the tragedy struck in October 1986. After an exhausting performance, Phyllis returned home to find that Larry had unilaterally signed a check to buy a new Mercedes and had also withdrawn $5,000 from her personal account in advance to invest in studio equipment. Her already fragile endurance shattered, transforming the apartment into a battlefield of anger and humiliation. After their separation in 1987, Phyllis gradually sank into depression and sought escape in drugs. Despite the stage lights still calling her name, she no longer had the strength to hold on to her faith. In 1995, Phyllis Hyman ended her life at 45, leaving behind only a note stating that she had tried but was too tired. And then Larry Alexander vanished from the entertainment industry, leaving behind a chillingly sad story of a poor man clinging to the aura of the woman he loved until that aura was extinguished forever. 18. Billy Paul, the Soul King's money-burning marriage. After the tragedy of Phyllis Hyman, the list of black artists who married poor partners and then plunged their own lives into chaos continues with the story of Billy Paul. Initially, it all seemed like a beautiful love story. In 1971, Billy, then a struggling lounge singer, fell in love with Blanche Williams, a waitress at a South Philly diner who often wore an apron singed from the oil stove. They had a simple wedding, no lavish gown, just a fried chicken dinner and a promise to escape poverty together. But just a year later, the world changed. Me and Mrs. Jones was released in 1972, quickly soaring to #1. One on Billboard, making Billy the new king of soul. Money poured in, his schedule was packed with shows, and each night he earned tens of thousands of dollars. It was then that Blanche began to change. From a frayed leather wallet, she moved to a Gucci bag, then Italian leather shoes and cashmere coats. The press whispered, calling Blanche the extravagant lady, but Billy tried to turn a blind eye. It wasn't until June 3, 1975, that the truth was starkly revealed. That day, at the King of Prussia Mall, Billy accidentally spotted Blanche arm in arm with his personal financial manager. She was clutching a receipt for a brand new white fox fur coat priced at $20,000, enough money to buy a small apartment in South Philly. Blanche even smiled brightly, showing off a newly acquired diamond ring, just as a Philadelphia Daily News reporter pointed a camera at her. The next day, the newspaper ran a huge headline, "From waitress to money-burning lady." Billy couldn't utter a word. He turned and walked away, leaving Blanche standing alone amidst the designer bags, her face stunned. Just 1 year later, they separated. Billy Paul, as a result, squandered almost all his fortune, leaving behind a chilling lesson. Wealth doesn't save the impoverished. It only exposes the deep-seated thirst hidden within every person. 17. Minnie Riperton, The Poor Husband, and the Legacy of the 5-Octave Diva. Can you imagine the angelic voice of Motown singing her last song while the husband who once promised "forever by your side" was busy signing contracts in her name for money? Minnie Riperton wasn't just a diva. She was a rare miracle of American soul music, possessing a 5-octave vocal range that made "Lovin' You" an immortal tune. Yet, behind that brilliant sound was a marriage that began with love and ended in bitter suspicion. Richard Rudolph entered Minnie's life with nothing. Born in the working-class South Side of Chicago, he grew up on the meager earnings of his foster mother, who worked as a cleaner. In winter, Richard had to wear old hand-me-down coats from his cousins. Even as an adult, he didn't even own a proper bed, sleeping on friends' floors after nights of playing music for a few loose dollars. Yet, when Minnie first saw Richard, she believed he was a kindred spirit. In 1972, they had a simple wedding. No one cared about the flimsy ring worth a few tens of dollars. Minnie believed then that the lack of material things would be compensated by passion and kindness. Indeed, from that day on, she bore all the burdens, paying for her children's tuition, buying an apartment in Los Angeles, and funding Richard's music projects. Everyone whispered that the family survived solely on Minnie's singing, but she tried to ignore it. By January 1976, when doctors informed Minnie she had late-stage breast cancer, her exhaustion made her cling even more to her once impoverished husband. Out of trust, Minnie handed over all her financial documents to Richard. Initially, everything happened quietly. Then unease began to grow as the family realized Richard was increasingly seen with lawyers and recording partners. The unforgettable moment occurred on the morning of April 14, 1978. In the antiseptic-smelling waiting room of Cedars-Sinai Hospital, Minnie's brother, Dan Riperton, was stunned to see Richard bowed over, signing a thick contract. It was paperwork to establish the Minnie Riperton Foundation, in which Richard appointed himself the sole representative, controlling all revenue from his wife's name. Even the $1,500 lawyer's fee was directly withdrawn from Minnie's account at the very moment she was on oxygen, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. That very night, Minnie held her brother's hand, her voice breaking, tears streaming onto her pillow. She was no longer sure if the man who once shared her cramped bed and sparse meals still loved her, or only loved the wealth she had created. The family immediately held an emergency meeting, hiring lawyers to block Richard's rights. For weeks afterward, no one dared to mention that charity fund, as if merely speaking its name would cause everything to collapse. When Minnie Riperton took her last breath on July 12, 1979, at the age of 31, Richard remained the sole holder of her copyrights. The press called him a devoted husband, but many also despised him, believing he was just someone who grew up with hunger and ultimately clung to his wife's legacy to escape poverty, leaving behind a painfully tragic chapter about ambition and poverty that never truly lets go. 16. Al Jarreau, the cheap cover model and 40 years of an enduring marriage. In contrast to the shattered marriages ruined by ambition and suspicion, the love story of Al Jarreau and Susan Player Jarreau began in poverty, but ended with such rare fidelity that many found it hard to believe. Susan Player grew up in California in a cramped rental house with just enough space for an old bed and a worn-out sofa. Some nights, she had to sleep on the cold concrete floor, using her jacket to cover her face to lessen the musty smell. At 17, Susan got a job at a roadside restaurant, working 3 shifts a week to earn enough for food. By her 20s, she was a B-grade magazine cover model, taking bikini photos just to cover gas and utility bills. When Al Jarreau met her in 1977, he was already famous for "We're in this love together," while Susan still had to rewear old dresses for events. Many frankly told Al that marrying a penniless waitress was a lifelong burden. But he just smiled, saying she was the only one who brought him peace amidst his exhausting tours. They married quietly, without a lavish party. At that time, Susan didn't even have her own bank account. For 40 years, she refused to hire a professional manager, personally handling all schedules, paperwork, and even washing her husband's expensive stage clothes. On one occasion, when Al was touring in Munich, Susan had to pawn her jewelry to pay for the hotel because a sponsor canceled at the last minute. Towards the end of his life, tragedy quietly sought them out, testing their love. Al suffered from severe lung disease, making it so difficult to breathe that he couldn't sing even a single note. Some nights he would scream in pain from fluid in his lungs, while Susan sat by his bedside, clutching his hand until it bled. Despite her exhaustion, she didn't hire a private nurse, insisting on feeding him every spoonful of gruel, cleaning him, and changing sweat-soaked bedsheets herself. On February 12, 2017, Al took his last breath. In the hospital room, there was only the hoarse sobbing of Susan and their son. After his death, there were no scandals, no fights over his inheritance. For those who once scorned the impoverished woman, it was an unbelievable outcome. Sometimes it's the one with nothing who knows how to love completely, even when that love cruelly drags them through the depths of pain. 15. Teddy Pendergrass, the poor wife suspected of living off the accident. Next, the marriage of Teddy Pendergrass and Karen Still reveals a more bitter truth, when poverty clings on as a prejudice that overshadows an entire marriage. Karen Still was born in a damp brick house in North Philadelphia. On winter nights, her father, a night shift security guard, had to light an oil lamp to warm the children. Every month, Karen's mother would painstakingly calculate whether their food stamps were enough to buy milk. Throughout her childhood, Karen wore her older sister's hand-me-down clothes. Her black scuffed shoes from the age of 13 still had to be mended and worn until high school graduation. By 1978, Karen was hired as a low-level secretary at the transportation company, earning $3 an hour with no health insurance. Some days she had to borrow $5 from colleagues to buy a carton of eggs. During those difficult evenings, Karen would still listen to the radio playing "Turn Off the Lights," vaguely thinking of Teddy Pendergrass as a world she could never reach. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. In 1979, they met backstage at a show. Just a few months later, Karen moved into Teddy's large house. There, she had to learn how to interact with housekeepers and private secretaries. Everyone thought Karen was lucky. Only she knew she still hid a few coins under her pillow just in case she was kicked out in the middle of the night. Then, on the night of March 18, 1982, Teddy's Rolls-Royce crashed into a median on Lincoln Drive. The collision left him permanently paralyzed. That evening, Karen stood shivering outside the ICU, still wearing her old sweater because she hadn't had time to change. For weeks, she slept on a plastic hospital chair, her dinner consisting only of cold French fries. When Teddy woke up, he didn't want to see his wife. In his memoir, Truly Blessed, he recounted screaming at Karen to leave because he couldn't stand her pitying gaze. Some nights, nurses saw her crying on the floor, trembling like a child. On May 12, 1983, Karen signed papers to receive an insurance settlement worth nearly $1.3 million. As she bowed her head to sign the check, she realized she had become her husband's reluctant manager and was no longer his beloved wife. Teddy's relatives began to gossip that Karen was living off the accident, while her old friends shook their heads, saying that ultimately, poor people are never trusted to be pure. In the end, their marriage crumbled under the weight of guilt and slander. Teddy fell into solitude, while Karen disappeared from public scrutiny. And in this list, they leave a bitter ending. Poverty doesn't disappear. It merely changes its form. 14. Peabo Bryson, the stage assistant who became a short-lived queen and a missing $280,000 bank statement. Peabo Bryson was once a living testament to the American dream, a Georgia boy who grew up with nothing but a voice, only to become a soul music king. But when Peabo became famous everywhere thanks to Beauty and the Beast, he chose Angela, a stage assistant who used to wander, sleeping in prop rooms and collecting tips for dinner. They married in March 1991 when she still didn't have a credit card, and he had just signed a 7-figure recording contract. Angela was given control over all spending, from buying a Range Rover to furnishing their home with Italian furniture. But nearly 6 years later, on June 14, 1997, Peabo sat alone in his Nashville studio holding a bank statement, 18 withdrawals, totaling over $280,000, had vanished without explanation. That night, he left home without looking back. The divorce ended with a $500,000 settlement, a quiet but thorough cut. Since then, Peabo never believed that love and status could coexist for long. 13. Betty Wright, the impoverished marriage. Betrayed. Meanwhile, Betty Wright's story is different, not about money, but about a hunger for self-respect. She married an unknown musician in Miami, someone who grew up crammed 7 to a rickety house, with dinner being cold noodles and water. When Betty started having hits like Clean Up Woman, she brought him into her band so he wouldn't have to sleep in the instrument truck. For 5 years, Betty paid off credit card debt, bought new guitars, and covered his asthma medication and overdue phone bills. She said, "I literally and figuratively fed him." But on the night of August 9, 1976, after a Chicago tour, she returned to her apartment to find him with a young singer, the girl who had once asked Betty for an autograph on a poster. In a panic, he smashed a mirror and the glass shards cut her hand. The next morning, the Miami newspaper ran a photo of her shattered door. Betty Wright leaves husband, ending an impoverished and betrayed marriage. And so, Betty left with 2 suitcases, not taking a single cent. The marriage that was supposed to save her life ultimately only exposed the cruel limits of trust. 12. George Benson, the rotting marriage with the former housekeeper. The next marriage will prove that status disparity isn't just a number. It's a lifelong crack that can never be erased. George Benson was hailed as the golden guitarist of the 70s, the man who turned Give Me the Night into an immortal melody. But in his very own kitchen, mornings looked no different than the old Pittsburgh where his wife grew up. Johnny Lee used to work as a hired housekeeper, living crowded with 7 people in a moldy room, with dinner consisting only of dry bread and a cup of powdered milk divided into 3 portions. In winter, they used cardboard to line their mattresses to avoid the freezing floor. After their secret marriage in 1975, George moved her into a spacious house in New York, hiring 2 cleaners and a live-in housekeeper 24 hours a day. Still, Johnny maintained the habit of waking at 5 a.m. to scrub the kitchen floor herself, rubbing until her hands were raw because she didn't believe anyone else would clean it as thoroughly. Neighbors said she meticulously recorded every bill for meat, butter, and rice, even when the amount was less than a fraction of her husband's income from a single night's performance. Many nights, arguments erupted not from jealousy, but simply from unintentional remarks that exposed the unbridgeable gap. Once, George was annoyed when Johnny wore an old sweater to entertain record company executives. He blurted out, "You don't understand how people see us." That night, Johnny locked her room, sitting alone on the floor with her old expense notebook, still detailing meals like dinner, 75 cents. In 1982, George admitted in a Rolling Stone interview that they had come close to giving up many times because no one knew how to erase the memories of poverty from the brightly lit kitchen. Later, when their children grew up, she moved into the basement to live separately. Every morning, she would still go up to the main house to cook breakfast and then quietly disappear before George's guests woke up. Even in the late 90s, when George received a Lifetime Achievement Award, Johnny didn't appear with him. They never divorced, but for nearly 2 decades, she lived in a corner of the house that no one entered. And perhaps that was the cruelest part. The marriage didn't publicly break. It just silently rotted away in unvoiced shame. 11. Mavis Staples, the marriage to a construction worker. Opposed by her family. Can you believe that the husband of a gospel queen was just a construction worker? That's the little-known story of Mavis Staples, who transformed the sound of Chicago into a symbol of struggle. When Mavis reached the peak of her fame with the Staples Singers, she met a man who astonished her entire family. Her husband, a construction worker from Mississippi, who moved to Chicago to lay bricks. He grew up in cotton fields, was a bricklayer's helper by 10, and moved to the city for work at 20. They met in 1966 when Mavis was invited to sing at the groundbreaking ceremony for a public housing project where her future husband was shoveling bricks. Mavis always said it was pure love, but her family thought otherwise. Her father, Pop Staples, once warned his daughter that marrying a man who didn't understand the language of the stage would only lead to tragedy. The peak of tension occurred in February 1967. During a family dinner, amidst the sound of rain drumming on the tin roof, Pop stood up, slammed his hand on the table, and declared he wouldn't attend the wedding. Mavis said she had never seen her father lose his composure like that in her life. Despite the opposition, they married quietly with only a few friends as witnesses. But the price they paid was not small. At every performance, he sat at the back of the room, quietly listening to the crowd praise his wife. Mavis once said, "He never asked me how much money I made, but I knew he suffered a lot." In 1972, when Mavis went on a 4-month European tour, they barely communicated. The day she returned, he had moved into another apartment, leaving a handwritten letter. "I love you, but I can't live as an extra in this house." That was the quiet end of a marriage not broken by a lack of love, but because not every man has enough self-respect to forever stand in his wife's shadow. 10. Ernie Isley, the wife from the laundromat who couldn't live with fame. Perhaps among all the precarious marriages of soul artists, Ernie Isley's life is a special example of how fame can creep into even the kitchen, affecting every simple meal that 2 people thought would be enough to hold them together. Ernie, the famous guitarist of the Isley Brothers, met his wife in 1976 at a laundromat in New Jersey. She was the daughter of Jamaican immigrants, her childhood spent in a cramped room where dinner was rice and beans and a bit of dried fish. At 16, she worked night shifts doing laundry to help her mother pay off store credit debt. When Ernie walked into the shop, she was folding his rented white performance shirts. They married quickly, almost escaping public attention. But soon after, local newspapers called her the laundromat wife and spread rumors that she only married him to live off him. For years, she avoided all interviews, refusing to attend red carpet events. A pivotal moment occurred in the summer of 1983. At a party celebrating the gold album Between the Sheets, amidst the cheers and champagne, Ernie stepped onto the balcony and saw her quietly eating a plate of cold rice, her eyes red. That was the moment he understood. The luxurious house still wasn't enough for her to forget she was once a Jamaican girl standing behind the laundry counter. Ultimately, they didn't divorce. On the contrary, the marriage lasted until today, but not without its cost. For many years, she refused to move into the main floor, staying only in a small room in the backyard as a way to maintain some self-respect. Ernie once said, "I'm not sure she ever felt she belonged in this life." 9. Bobby Bland. The drunkenness that shattered all respect. Have you ever wondered what happens when a blues king falls in love with a girl who grew up in cotton fields and impoverished harvests? Bobby Bland, the gravelly voice of Turn on Your Love Light, met Willie Mae when she was just 18. She was born on a Tennessee farm where children had to wake at 3 a.m. to pick corn, and by night they slept on old burlap sacks. In winter, Willie's mother sewed rags into clothes, and her father traded corn for lamp oil. They married in 1955, when Bobby had just begun to get his first recording contract. The marriage quickly became rocky due to his heavy drinking. For years, Willie Mae raised their children while cleaning up the battlefield after each of her husband's drunken episodes. On the night of February 14, 1963, everything shattered. Bobby returned home to Memphis after a long tour, so drunk he didn't recognize his wife waiting in the kitchen with a Valentine's dinner. He threw the plate of meatballs onto the floor, roaring that he didn't need a pity meal. Neighbors said Willie sat picking up each fallen piece of meat, her hands covered in sauce, while Bobby passed out in an armchair. That was the night she decided to leave for the first time. Although they later reconciled, the marriage never fully recovered. Bobby continued to drink, and Willie Mae never forgot the feeling of picking up a ruined dinner at the feet of her drunken husband. Ultimately, they stayed together until the end of their lives, but like an old couple, enduring droughts together. And one question lingered: who can bear the sorrow of a blues singer when he himself never learned to love without self-destruction? 8. O.V. Wright and Loretta. A love story that began with pity in a $5 motel. Next is a little-known story, a love story that began in a makeshift motel room and ended with an emptiness no party could fill. Loretta grew up without parents, moving through 12 foster homes in Memphis, then drifted to a small church when she was too old for welfare. She was used to wearing old uniform dresses, eating charity meals, and dared not dream of her own room. At 18, Loretta quietly moved into a wooden chair storage room, spreading a thin blanket as a bed. And O.V. Wright met that girl in the fall of 1964. When he sang "You're Gonna Make Me Cry" at a ceremony, Loretta sat in the back row, hands clasped tightly to keep from trembling with hunger. That night, he knew she had nowhere else to go. O.V. took her to a $5 a night motel, paying for a week. Everyone said he was acting out of pity, but O.V. insisted she was the one he wanted to protect. They married quietly, but the marriage was not easy. Even though Loretta had a home, she couldn't believe she deserved a full meal, nor was she used to the new wardrobe he bought. Whenever O.V. went on tour, she would sleep on the sofa, afraid she would lose everything if she dared to be content with what she had. The climax occurred on the night of August 17, 1970, when O.V. returned to Houston after 4 nights of performances. He walked into the room and found Loretta quietly stuffing clothes into a paper bag. There was no argument. She just repeated one sentence: I don't want anyone to say I'm clinging to your life. After that night, Loretta disappeared from his life. They never officially divorced, but for the rest of his years, O.V. said he never slept soundly in his large, empty house. When he passed away in 1980, Loretta did not attend the funeral. When asked why, she simply said, "Don't ask me to go back to a place where I never belonged." 7. Clarence Carter, The Subsidized Apartment and the Last Tear. Following Loretta's fate, the story of Clarence Carter and Candy Staton is another testament. Fame couldn't bridge the silent gap that separated two people. When Clarence married Candy in 1970, he was already a celebrated soul phenomenon across the South, filling concert halls from Nashville to New Orleans every night. He drove a gleaming black Cadillac Eldorado with his name etched on the license plate, and his per-show fee was enough to support a family for a year. On Saturday nights, Clarence would don a wine-colored silk suit and step onto the stage to thunderous applause. In stark contrast, Candy still lived in a subsidized apartment in Alabama, a row of chipped red brick houses near the train tracks, where her welfare certificate was taped right on the front door. Her childhood was marked by meager dinners, smelling of boiled corn and a crackling stove, and in winter they had to burn scraps of wood scavenged from the backyard. Every night, a box of food stamps sat on top of the refrigerator next to a jar of coins for milk. Her mother often said, "Don't be ashamed, poverty is only temporary." But when her friends wore new leather shoes while she wore old borrowed sandals from her sister, Candy understood that the shadow of hardship wasn't easy to shake off. The wedding between these two vastly different people happened quickly, with few guests and no reporters. But without the press, people still knew that the disparity would slowly erode their self-respect. In her memoir, Candy recounted secretly bringing a bag of old clothes to her new home, hiding them under the bed because she didn't want to wear only the silk dresses Clarence bought her. On April 5, 1972, Clarence returned from a show in Atlanta. He wanted to throw a party to celebrate his new single, Climbing the Charts. But when he walked into the kitchen, Candy was sitting alone, counting individual coins in a glass jar, afraid the food money would run out before he transferred funds. The entire three-story house was eerily silent, and then Clarence irritably threw a stack of bills onto the table. In that moment, all the distance, all the rumors of the welfare girl clinging on, overwhelmed them. Their marriage lasted another 4 years, but eventually, Candy filed for divorce. In the papers, she didn't ask for alimony, simply writing, "I'm tired of proving I'm not a burden." Later, Candy continued to sing gospel and stated frankly in an interview, "Fame just magnifies every insecurity. At that point, you no longer know who loves whom for who they truly are." 6. Johnny Nash, The Maid in a Wedding Dress. After Johnny Nash's "I Can See Clearly Now," everyone believed his life had truly entered a happy chapter. But behind the glamour, in 1973, Nash returned to Houston and fell in love with a girl who worked the night shift at a small bar on Travis Street. That summer, the bar didn't even have air conditioning. She often had to wipe down the counter until almost morning, then sleep on friends' couches. In September 1973, Johnny took her to Jamaica, where they lived in a 3-story villa overlooking Montego Bay. The press at the time called it a fairy tale romance, but soon rumors began to spread. She was just the maid in a wedding dress. Neighbors said every morning she still wore an apron, counted every penny for rice, and personally washed bedsheets even with 7 staff members. One day in February 1974, a local reporter captured a photo of her scrubbing marble steps, her face downcast. That photo was printed in the newspaper with the heartbreaking headline, "From Bar to Villa Kitchen, a One-Way Life Change." Johnny never corrected it. In a 1978 interview, he quietly said, "Sometimes loving someone used to bowing down is harder than writing a hit song." 5. Jackie Wilson, when Mr. Excitement couldn't keep a home together. Speaking of precarious marriages, no one forgets Jackie Wilson, Mr. Excitement, who turned every Detroit stage into an endless party. When he married Frida in 1951, she still lived with her mother in an old brick house where winters were bone-chilling and children had to burn newspapers to warm their hands. After the wedding, Jackie bought a velvet red apartment on Grand River Avenue, gifting it to his wife's family. Yet, wealth couldn't compensate for insecurity. On the night of December 24, 1961, Christmas Eve, Frida returned early after dinner with her mother. She opened the apartment door, and the first sight that met her eyes was Jackie embracing a young dancer on the dark red sofa. The Christmas tree lights were still on. A wine glass had fallen onto the wool rug, leaving a dark stain like an indelible cut. Frida didn't say a word, simply took off her wedding ring, placed it on the table, and left. In 1962, she filed for divorce, refusing any claim to his assets. Later, Jackie confessed, "I could fill a concert hall, but I couldn't keep a home." 4. Billy Preston, the poor lover, and the will battle. And Billy Preston, he never had a chance to apologize to anyone. In the spring of 1967, Billy met his long-term partner, at that time just a gas station attendant in Amarillo, Texas, who had to sleep in an old truck. They were quietly together for nearly 4 decades, never publicly revealing their relationship. But when Billy passed away on June 6, 2006 in Scottsdale, the immense legacy he left behind, including Beatles royalties and solo album sales, immediately turned into a battleground. Rumors claimed his partner held a will signed in May 2005, when Billy was in a coma from liver failure, designating himself as the sole heir. Billy's family refuted this, presenting 2 other wills, one signed in December 2004, the other in February 2006, each designating a different person. The LA Times called it a 3-front war for a genius's soul. His assets were frozen for over 3 years. During that time, the gospel songs Billy believed would bring peace became the reason for endless arguments and lawsuits. 3. Solomon Burke, 21 children and impoverished wives. If Johnny Nash and Jackie Wilson only faced one tumultuous marriage, Solomon Burke's story was far more complex. He was not only the king of soul who could make thousands of audience members cry on stage, but also the father of 21 children, born from many intertwined relationships. His first official wife came from a working-class neighborhood in Pennsylvania, where winters were so cold that children had to burn newspapers to warm their hands. She grew up in a dilapidated red brick apartment, accustomed to dinners of just bread and cheap sauce. When she married Solomon, she only had an old cloth suitcase and the belief that love was enough to keep a famous man. But fame came too quickly. In the early 60s, Solomon began relationships with many other women, most of whom also came from poverty. Despite his wealth, he never settled, down with one family. People say that on Christmas Eve in 1981, he bought gifts that filled 3 vans, driving to each small apartment where his children lived with their mothers. At each place, he only stayed for about half an hour, gave gifts, and then left. In a later Rolling Stone interview, Solomon only briefly admitted, "I loved them all, but I couldn't give anyone a complete life." And in the end, the temporary rented houses, the meager meals, and the money envelopes left on the table were never enough for those children to believe they truly had a proper home. 2. Donny Hathaway, the ghost of poverty. Haunting marriage and life after Solomon Burke, people thought there couldn't be a sadder story about fame and loneliness. But then Donny Hathaway appeared, another testament that poverty isn't just a memory. It's a lifelong haunting. Donny grew up in a working-class neighborhood in St. Louis, where his mother hunched over sewing for hire, and could only afford a broken-down old organ. When he fell in love with Eulalia Van, a Chicago girl who used to sleep on her aunt's kitchen floor, Donny promised to build a home vastly different from their past hardship. But it was when the luxurious Essex House apartment in Manhattan was completed that the distance truly began. On the night of January 13, 1979, Donny returned from a mental hospital after weeks of therapy. In the living room, Eulalia sat with her knees drawn up, listening to him mumble self-reproach, calling himself a coward who didn't deserve it. In the early morning, Donny picked up an unrecorded song manuscript and quietly stepped out of the 15th floor window. No one could stop the fall. That day, the New York Times wrote, "The one who sang A Song for You no longer had the courage to keep that song for himself. And his poor wife, who once believed love could save everything, could only hug their small child and couldn't answer why he had to choose such a heartbreaking end." 1. Wilson Pickett, The Broken Ring Box, and the Three-Person Boarding Room. If Donny Hathaway crumbled in silence, Wilson Pickett turned marriage into a fiery collision with no winner. In 1963, while still singing backup in Detroit, Wilson met Bonnie, a 19-year-old girl living crammed 3 to an old dilapidated boarding room with a broken oil stove that required candles for warmth. They married when Wilson couldn't even afford a real ring, only a thin silver bracelet. But then, in the midnight hour, exploded, turning him into the new king of soul. Bonnie moved into a suburban mansion where red velvet chairs and imported liquor cabinets made her feel out of place. Some nights, Wilson would return from a show to find his wife hiding cash under the mattress, afraid of losing everything overnight. In September 1970, everything shattered. They argued in the spacious kitchen. Wilson threw the wedding ring box onto the floor, shouting, "You'll always be that girl from the boarding room, even if you wear a ton of gold." The next morning, Bonnie left, leaving a short note. "I never wanted your pity." Later, Wilson still sent alimony payments each month, but never publicly mentioned her name, as if that was the price to pay for once believing love could erase poverty. So, these are 19 lives, 19 chapters of tragedy we've just explored that deeply etch a cruel truth. No amount of money or glamour is enough to erase the shame of poverty and the emotional wounds that never heal. They loved, they believed, and then slowly lost themselves in marriages where honor, love, and exploitation intertwined suffocatingly. If these stories have given you a different perspective on the black artists you once admired, please share this video so more people can hear the truth behind the stage. Have you witnessed any similar tragedies? Don't hesitate to share in the comments section.